Although I'm someone who lived all of definitely my adult life, waiting for this moment to happen, but, you still can't believe that it's happening.
Twitter played a very important role. However, it's a symptom, not the cause, which means that if there wasn't Twitter, we would be something else.
I was tweeting from the front lines. I was able to do that because there were tens and hundreds of young men dying right in front of me and willing to take on the bullet.
I was asked in the early morning whether I was expecting, a revolution that day. And my answer was no.
I thought Jan 25 was just going to be just another demonstration with a couple of hundred people and a couple of thousand Central Security forces, and that was the end of that.
Suddenly you started seeing the signs of people moving here and there.
In a matter of seconds, we grew to 2,000 or 3,000. When the police tried to block our way with a cordon, I remember raising our arms and saying Silmiya, Silmiya, which is peaceful, peaceful, and there was no resistance because we really outnumbered them.
I was tweeting, taking photographs, recording videos, trying to share this experience, to try to get as many people as possible to realize, hey guys, this is not just yet another demonstration. We have thousands here.
CSF officers charging at the protesters. And usually what happens is that the protesters, run away. For a few moments, like some tens of people at the front line stopped. They kind of looked at each other and started attacking. Everybody started running towards the officers, and the officers actually ran away. This, for me, was just mind-blowing. Then they started putting up the barricades, and this was the initial sites of Tahrir being born, as we know it today.
In the meetings prior to January 25th, some activists did pose the question at some point, so when we reach Tahrir, what are we going to do? And I think everybody was like, well, when we reach Tahrir, we'll see. There was no plan. I mean, there was a plan, meaning we're gonna meet at some point, there will be marches. But the thing is, we're gonna reach Tahrir and we have a plan and there will be security committees. It's all crap. I mean, this is all spontaneous and it evolved, by time.
Late that night, all the people in the square, the thousands, drafted a statement with the demands.
We worded them out and so on from the chants that were happening all throughout the day.
The demands were removal of Mubarak, dissolving the parliament and the cabinet, and formation of a national coalition government. So this was January 25th at night, the first demands of the Egyptian revolution.
Around midnight or a little bit past midnight, they started firing tear gas from 3 or 4 different sides. I got actually hit that night with a rubber bullet.
That attack is what dispersed everyone. But I think we all left with a feeling of a lot of optimism for Friday, because Friday was going to be huge.
Ask me what's the most remarkable day in this revolution, I know most people will tell you the day Mubarak stepped down. For me, it's the Friday of anger. I will never forget that day.
The night before January 28th, I've never ever in my life been scared more than that night, because we had the internet shut down and they told us that all mobile networks will be down. And I was so obsessed about telling people what was happening.
I know many people who personally went down the 28th because they woke up and there was no internet and their cell phone was not working and they were very pissed off, so they went down and chanted in the streets.
So I went to Mustafa Mahmoud Mosque. The prayer started, and right after prayer,
of the very first voices of the chant, people want the downfall of the regime. And it was so powerful.
There were police present there, but the amount of people that showed up out of nowhere all of a sudden, the police couldn't do anything until we got to Galat Square.
You arrive there, everything is already devastated, and there's like police cars that have burned, tear gas, canisters, and the smoke, and people are being brought in that are shot and killed and injured, and the battle begins.
Police officers had actually abandoned some of the conscripts locked in the trucks.
They were in a state of complete demoralization. The police was already exhausted from fighting for 3 continuous days.
That particular battle went on for over 4 hours.
My gas mask stops working. You had people falling all around you. You ended up almost dying yourself. Your friend, while trying to save you, ends up getting shot in the head.
The revolutionaries conquered the police in this bridge, and we were just still trying to push against the police to go to Tahrir Square.
We didn't know what was happening in the rest of the country. Our biggest source of information during the march were the state security agents. We all like cornered, some SS agent. And then we asked him, so are there protests happening in the rest of the country? He's like, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. We kept on moving through downtown, and fighting the police square by square, square by square. And I remember the first time I stepped my foot in Tahrir Square that day was 5:35 p.m. exactly.
There's a fire there, and there was a battle on that side, and there's war drums on this side. There are people coming from different districts, and they had to go through battles. And then you start coming across people that you know who tell you their experience, and you tell them your experience.
What? The NGP building is on fire? We're burning down the one symbol that basically terrorized us and corrupted this country for years.
And then the army arrived. We saw tanks going through the streets of downtown Cairo. This means that the police have given up and they've pulled out.
And all I could think of is, okay, they are shutting off all communication. The army is going to just, open fire on us all, and this will be the end of it.
People were drawing parallels all the time between the situation of the Tunisian army that protected the revolution, and we need our army to do the same. There was this, chant which became popular. الشعب والجيش إيد واحدة. The people and the army are one hand. There were people surrounding, some military police officer. I got into a debate with him, and I asked him, are you here based upon orders from whom? He's like, from the Minister of Defense. So I told him, and the Minister of Defense, is he now the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, or is it still Hosni Mubarak? He's like, you can demonstrate, we're not gonna blah. And I told him, no, you need to tell me, are you here based on orders from Hosni Mubarak, or is it your own spontaneous, initiative?
I called my mom. She was obviously freaking out. And then my mom was like, you need to come back now. I was like, well, we burnt down the NDP building, so we're just gonna burn down the Parliament building, and then I'll be back home safe and sound. She didn't that wasn't very funny.
I didn't realize how much had happened until I went home and I started watching TV. That was the night when I saw the first statement for Hosni Mubarak.
وسوف أكلف الحكومة الجديدة اعتبارا من الغد.
We were expecting him, maybe to say, okay, now I understand you, I'm leaving, or I'm escaping or something. But no, he was still stubborn.
People died, the police is gone, the army is back, and this is what, it was a joke, it was a joke.
Just like everything else that happened in this revolution, there was no black and white. It was a grassroots movement, and I think we slowly but surely occupied the square. I went the entire day on January 29th, and then went back home, and then January 30th, I went to the square and stayed there.
1st of February was the beginning for me to actually stay on the square and not leave. We went to a nearby cafe to watch the speech.
each time Mubarak gave a speech, that created divisions.
أني لم أكن أنتوي الترشح
And I got phone
لفترة.
calls from my friends who are at home watching, and they thought this was victory to us. They called us to congratulate us, and I completely screamed at them.
What are you talking about? People have died. You know, we didn't go through all that for him to stay 6 months or so.
خلال الأشهر
I know that he's a tyrant, I know he's an evil man, but you know, we've known him for 30 years. We can give him 6 more months to have him leave with his dignity, and you're like, he didn't leave you with any of your dignity for 30 years, are you insane?
I think the speech worked not to the people sleeping over in the square, but you know how every morning we had streams of people coming and joining the square, and I know that the next day there weren't many people.
What really brought out this divide for me was the next morning. On the way to Tahrir, I started seeing the pro-Mubarak people.
A large group of people came up to us. So we came to the edge of the square, and there were thousands against thousands. And obviously, within minutes, a fight broke out, started getting bigger and bigger, and the army had completely disappeared.
Suddenly there are like horses and camels, and Tahrir Square is complete chaos, and I'm not understanding what's happening, and all I know is that my family is there.
I wasn't scared on January 28th, the day of ink. I wasn't scared when we were being attacked on the 25th, you know, being shot at with rubber bullets. I wasn't scared then. That moment, I was terrified.
It was one of the most horrible days for people who were in the square and people who were outside the square and could not reach them. So on one side, you're having half of your friends supporting Mubarak, the other half getting attacked in Tahrir.
It was at that particular point that I lost complete faith in the army. They're actually watching as people were fighting to the death.
We were definitely outnumbered by the mass amount of thugs that were coming in with all these weapons.
You hear like 4 shots, and then you immediately see 3 bodies fall right in front of you. And that's the signal that it's live ammunition.
I heard the shots and ran to the front line, and I saw them carrying 3 wounded and 1 dead. 1 dead shot right through the head.
We needed more support, like physical support. We also needed supplies.
At that stage, I went to the field hospital. It was very crowded. I asked the senior doctor, Munamina, and she said the 3 are dead so far. I remember tweeting that they are shooting at us and people are dying. And I remember a very good friend of mine saying, these are rumors, don't believe them. And I called them screaming, when I say people are dying, don't say these are rumors. If you don't believe us, just come here.
I didn't leave for many reasons. I was convinced that actually staying in the square is not only better for the square and the safety of the people there, but it's also safer to be all together. So we're either gonna be all massacred or we're gonna all stay out and stand our ground.
This was a transforming moment to me because I realized how far people are willing to go to actually make sure this revolution continues. But there was something very sad about it because the front lines were all very young men, and they are shooting at us live ammunition from top of the bridge and top of the buildings. But this doesn't seem to you know, deter any of them. They just really, they walk in masses of people. Some of them fall, they carry them back, and other masses join. It was strange.
Who, in the right state of mind, would love Mubarak so much that he or she would gather a group of camels and horses and try to attack their protesters in Tahrir? Those are obviously hired thugs.
At the end of the night, I mean, there was a room full of these thugs. They were kept in one of the underground metro, and every thug that we kept there had an NDP ID or a police ID.
We were reporting, so we sort of got the praise and, you know, the glory. I was tweeting from the front lines. I was able to do that because there were tens and hundreds of young men dying right in front of me and willing to take on the bullet, you know.
I think it was just a very incompetent move on behalf of government of Hosni Mubarak and his regime.
It showed to the public what's really happening. It also showed to the people in Tahrir how much they have faith in this battle together. The next morning, when light came, masses of people came.
From the 2nd to the 10th of February, it was the significance of building society within Tahrir Square, a microcosm, like a micro-society that showed us how we can all live together, how if we depended on each other without the government, we got along very well.
You had popular committees, you had food being, you know, equally distributed, and you had all sorts of things.
People dancing, and the chants even about Mubarak kept getting funnier and funnier.
There was music, street plays, and artistic expression of all sorts, all happening in that time.
And discussions. Suddenly there's this possibility of actually toppling that regime, and so there are discussions of what do we do, what do we want. But then I remember a point where we felt we had these arguments in the square because we felt that we are getting isolated in the square and nothing else is happening.
This argument is not gonna be that popular, I know, with many people, but it's not us in Tahrir who toppled Mubarak. And it's definitely not the army, and it's not America. What toppled Mubarak were the mass labor strikes that broke out in the last week of the uprising. In order to terrorize the population, the regime, not the workers, shut down the businesses, shut down the banks, shut down the ATMs, everything. It's only when the regime tried to normalize the situation. On the 5th of February, they opened up the businesses and the banks and everything. And the workers came back to their, workplaces, started talking to one another. And that's when the industrial actions, started everywhere, picking up the same slogans as those in Tahrir.
On the 8th, 9th, and 10th, we had nationwide strikes. On the 10th, he was still trying to hang on to power. He was giving it a final push with this third speech.
In my youth and during my war, I'm like, give me a break, just say what you're gonna say. And it was basically, I'm not leaving, I'm not leaving, I'm not leaving.
Everyone was disappointed and how everyone was really angry. Like the moment he started talking and realized he's not stepping down.
People were on fire in the square. The next day, Tahrir was so full, was so packed. Marches had started going to Maspiro, going to the presidential palace. And I knew once there are protests in Heliopolis, where I live, which is a place that never has any kind of anti-regime anything, that we are this close of Mubarak stepping down.
Kind of like the sunset time around on the 11th of February.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
You start looking at Twitter and you see tweets that say, yes, finally, and stuff like that. No one actually says anything, like it's just, and then you start looking up, wait a minute, I think there's been a speech.
خليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية وكلف المجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة.
Omar Slimane came out, gave a short speech, and he said that Hosni Mubarak is stepping down and he's handing over power to the army.
Everyone is screaming, everyone is hugging everyone, and everyone's saying he's gone.
I've seen 6 American presidents, and I've only seen that guy in power. To get rid of him, that was huge.
I just couldn't believe myself, and I'm like, nobody will rule us like him again, and this is for every dictator out there.
Mubarak hands power to the army, and I think people accepted because no one could have imagined that we were to get rid of Mubarak. No one could have imagined that Gamal Mubarak was not going to be the president. And at the same time, people thought very highly and still do think highly of the army.
A lot of us knew that the army taking over is not necessarily a good thing. But we also knew that this is a victory, and that it's sort of wrong not to celebrate a victory. People paid for this, their lives, their health, and it was a big thing. This was the symbolic representation of the regime, Mubarak.
I knew from that day that, you know, with SCAF in power, it's not going to be easy. These are Mubarak loyalists, these are Mubarak's generals. They're as much part of the regime as him, and we gotta keep going. But it was a really good night.
A lot of people thought now is the time to go to the square and celebrate, but this was the time I was like, okay, now I need to take my family, we need to go to my father. My father and my mother have been working on this for so long. I was born while my dad was in prison, and I've seen him for years, sort of him and my mother, their health and their life and their time invested in exposing the crimes of the regime and working against it.
Rumor has it Mubarak did film an resignation video. And in that video, he left the country to the vice president and prime minister, which would make sense. That video was not aired. Instead, we saw a 10-second video of Omar Suleiman stating that Mubarak has abdicated, and instead of him taking over power as the VP, he's leaving the entire thing to the military, which makes no sense, since why would you leave power to the military if you just hired a VP?
We got rid of Mubarak, but his own army generals took over and they were running the show. That old Turkish model, which entitled the army to be a great red line. You never question the army about their budget. You never question the army's control over political life. You will not question Mubarak's army generals about their control of 25% to 40% of the economy. And for me, we didn't sacrifice all of these sacrifices in order to get this old Turkish model. We started a revolution, so let's finish it. Because those who carry out half a revolution, they dig their own graves. As much as I was happy, I was like, no, this is like the beginning, actually, of a real revolution.
I left on the night of the 12th. It was pretty much one of the last tents to leave, if not the last one.
The general feeling was like we're exhausted, maybe we need, some time off from the protests in Tahrir, and let's give the generals a chance.
The sit-in continued in Tahrir, but it was smaller because many people thought this is enough. But a lot of the revolutionaries decided to stay on because the government was led by Shafiq, who was actually prime minister while the Bloody Wednesday happened on February 2nd.
We had a political transitional period, supposedly, and that's what every revolution goes through. But who's engineering it?
You are welcome to Egypt.
Is it the revolutionaries, or is it, Mubarak's own generals?
We had so many enemies, and so we knew we needed to go after them and cleanse this country of corrupt crooks. When Ahmed Shafiq stepped down, there were documents being burnt all over the country.
We started getting reports of fires breaking out in the state security police offices around the country. And state security agents like burning papers.
So on the 5th of March, there was a storming of the state security.
Its counterparts in Western countries would be the FBI and the MI5, but these guys are much more similar to the Gestapo. They were on the retreat after we took over Tahrir, but they were not completely gone.
But as soon as people got in and started filming, they saw that all the documents had been shredded, a lot of documents had been burned, a lot of things had been thrown and taken away.
I saw the room where I was kept, in 2002, when I was detained then. I was crying. State security police had made my life miserable, had made the lives of, millions of other Egyptians miserable over the past years. These are the places where you were humiliated, where you were stripped naked, where you were sodomized, where you were whipped, where you were handcuffed and hung from the ceiling. It was horrible, but at the same time, there was definitely a sense of victory. We've managed to bring those guys down. We couldn't leak all of the documents because the army was there and started arresting people. If they could have shot us and massacred us on that day, they would have done it. But state security is so much hated by everybody. If the army would have appeared to be like massacring protesters, who are trying to save documents at the end of the day from destruction, they would have really looked bad.
At what point did reality bite? I think it was the 9th of March.
Around 4 p.m., it seems that they took the decision to completely evacuate Tahrir Square.
And everybody was just like, someone provoked them. I think someone is trying to put a wedge between the revolutionaries and the army. They're trying to get us to fight.
They arrested around 180 activists. 18 of them were women.
They took them to the museum, arrested them, and then did what they called virginity tests.
They were asked if they are virgins or not, and those who claimed to be virgins went through a check. A guy, they don't know if he's a doctor or not, he's wearing military uniform, but on top of it a white coat. And there were other soldiers and officers in the room, and he basically inserted his finger in them and checked.
The idea was that they were proving that women who took part in the demonstrations in Tahrir Square are immoral.
In the media, the spokesman of the army talked about how Tahrir is no longer for pure revolutionaries and it is used by people of ill repute for drug and prostitution.
It's a completely sick mind of the Egyptian military and the military council. The whole idea was to discourage women and to scare them from ever taking part.
The same people who would give military salutes to the man who was ruling us for 30 years were suddenly leading the transition of the people who overthrew him. So they're not on your side.
Out of nowhere, the military decided that we're going to have a referendum.
The March 19th referendum was marketed by SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, as step one towards restoring democracy in this country and towards return to civilian rule.
It was the first milestone where we started parting ways, where the revolutionaries were split. And that's because the Islamists started supporting the military and joining forces with the military to try to gain power as early as possible.
They're like, okay, let's go and get people to vote for this because it's all about the second article. They wanted to change, they wanted to remove God from our lives. Nobody was talking about the second article of the Constitution.
The Islamist forces mobilized around the question of you need to vote yes, or else the Christians are trying to plan some devious new constitution that will take away Islam as the official religion of the state. There was so much misinformation and propaganda.
So they got a lot of people to say yes for the constitutional amendments. Obviously, all the revolutionaries were saying no because they said we cannot work with the constitution that has been there from before.
Any sort of events in that political transitional period that's engineered by Mubarak's generals is not going to bring us in the end what we want.
I voted yes because the no scenario did not give a clear plan of, okay, we vote no for constitutional amendments, then what is the plan for the transition? What is going to happen? Of course, now it turns out that yes or no were completely meaningless because it's not as if they actually respected the results of yes. We voted on 9 amendments only. All of a sudden, they are 50-something.
Oh, yeah, and those are the articles in which they give themselves the executive power and the judicial power and the legislative power and everything. It was interesting because people were very okay with it. They're like, oh, that makes sense. You know, we don't have any parliament, and we don't, so it's very normal for them to have the executive and the legislative branch of government. And all the guns. Yeah.
On the 15th of May, there were mass protests in front of the Israeli embassy in Giza.
It was all just a moral move of support to tell the Palestinians, you know what, while we can't fight with you, we fully support you.
It was the first time for me where live bullets are being shot at protesters by military.
It's so disgusting how the Egyptian military was so focused on pleasing the US, on fully supporting Israel, to the extent that they're willing to actually kill and arrest Egyptians.
One of the protesters was shot in the head, and I have testimonies of the people there right on the spot saying, like, this guy was shot in the head.
And I was shooting videos and taking pictures and tweeting. Out of nowhere, we see a group of military soldiers running towards us with rifles, shooting in the air. Luckily, I was able to pull out my cell phone and start recording a video that streams live.
They were made to kneel on the ground. They were treated as POWs with complete humiliation and insults and beatings and electric shocks, were used.
Over 160 people were arrested and tried in military courts, including Tahrir Shalabi, my friend.
We were charged for attacking the military and attacking the police, which obviously didn't happen, conspiring to bring down a regime or something to that effect. Well, we weren't really doing that unless you consider the revolution that, which is what it is. So, I don't know, that's kind of confusing. The judges came back and they said that we are innocent of 3 charges and that we are sentenced to 1 year on the other 3. However, the sentence is suspended.
Whenever there's a known activist like Tariq Shalabi, I'm sorry, Tariq, but I thank God that they are in this group because their publicity and the campaign triggered for them helps all of the other anonymous detainees with. Since the army stepped in the streets of Cairo, they have been randomly arresting masses of people, putting them through military trials, sentencing them to very harsh sentences in 2 and 3 days.
Where did it all go wrong? Why am I being sentenced, a suspended sentence, to a year in prison for taking part in peaceful protests in front of the Israeli embassy? I mean, we had a revolution, for God's sake.
There was a call for a sit-in and to go back to Tahrir with the lack of, the demands of the revolution being met.
Since the 18th day, it was the first big movement that is spread all over Egypt, and it was also very clearly demands against the army.
Mubarak was still in Sharm el-Sheikh, nothing was happening. Not one single police officer that was accused of killing protesters was seriously tried.
Started off on a high note. We're back to Tahrir, we're gonna bring down the SCAF, we're gonna do this and that, that was the idea.
They planted a lot of informants and military in the middle, so there were actually constantly fights erupting.
Infiltrators, druggies, state security and military intelligence people causing all kinds of problems and havoc.
Strategically, it should have ended. But the problem we had is that the martyrs' family didn't want to leave. We knew we were going to get beaten up, it was inevitable. but we couldn't leave them.
The army evacuated the sit-in brutally on the first day of Ramadan. This was the first day the families were gonna go through Ramadan without their kids. I mean, it was just a very, very, very sad day. But at least 2 days later, we saw Mubarak in the cage.
Mubarak was finally arrested because of public pressure. If we had listened to those activists who told us to stop the protests after the 12th of February, Mubarak would have been still enjoying his time in Sharm el-Sheikh.
To actually see it happen, it's like I wanted someone to pinch me.
Everyone was calling me to ask me, what did you think of Mubarak's trial? And I wanted to tell them, well, there are 12,000 civilians who have been tried and nobody was interested in their trial. But the truth is, there's actually something very satisfying about seeing him behind bars.
It's a circus. There is no question about that. You have Mubarak's Minister of Defense, trying Mubarak, What can you expect at the end of the day?
Every person ended his or her personal honeymoon with the army at some point. With every incident, every event that's happening, more and more people turn against the army.
What happened in Maspero on the 9th of October is such a national day of shame. There was a peaceful march in order to denounce attacks on the Coptic community and the churches.
The whole thing was organized. They had dealt with the military, they agreed with them, they're gonna go, they're gonna stand there, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that, they're gonna leave.
But then as they reached Maspero, the army started going mad.
That day we lost 28 martyrs. They were either shot at by live ammunition from the army or were ran over by army trucks. The Egyptian state TV played a filthy role. They actually spread rumors that there were soldiers killed, and they actually urged honorable Egyptians to go down and defend the army.
Let's repeat that. To protect the army. From the Copts, the scary Copts. Save the army, because the army does not have reinforcements, and they can't call for reinforcements, and they can't call for the police. Please, no, let's be responsible and get Egyptians to fight Egyptians so we can protect the army who is killing the Copts. That was a brilliant moment in the history of our great nation.
The witch hunt against Christians afterwards that happened in the neighborhood is unbelievable. It reminds you of Nazi Germany and the Jews, where soldiers were storming buildings looking for Christians. They would be holding the hands of people to make sure if, whether they have the tattoo, of the cross or not.
A lot of people fell for it, and they did believe that the Christians were armed, which they weren't. They did believe that they were violent, which they weren't at all. And they did believe that military personnel died.
We all know that it's the divide and rule game.
The US is funding this military to run over minorities that they always praise to protect and are worried so much about the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Islamists coming to power, when they fund the same arm that is crushing Christians.
The next day is probably one of the bleakest days ever for many of us, because we spent it all in the Coptic hospital and trying to convince the families of the martyrs that they shouldn't bury their kids without proper autopsies. My brother and friends and many volunteers worked very hard on this and convincing the families and on securing the forensic doctors that are going to do that, and eventually this happened. When this was done, 17 of our martyrs were carried by us to the cathedral to bid them farewell.
For SCAF to justify it by saying, oh, the tanks were stolen. The protesters stole the tanks and ran over themselves. I mean, it just made no sense.
If everybody wanted to believe, again, that there was a third party involved that ignited things and incited people. You paid for that later on. You paid for that at Mohammed Mahmoud. That was when you paid for the fact that you did not say something about, when the army killed, the Coptic protesters.
In mid-November, there was this document called Wasiqat al-Silmi. Article 9 of that gave the military full control and said that the military is above the constitution.
We had mass protests in Tahrir that witnessed the participation of all political forces from the left to the right to force the army into handing over power to civilian rule.
Clashes broke out with the police in the street that's called Mohammed Mahmoud.
And again, the media war of them claiming we are trying to attack the Ministry of Interior.
الشرطة لم تستخدم الرصاص بكل أنواعه.
And the whole narrative goes, those in Tahrir are not the real revolutionaries. We're being financed by the CIA, we're being trained by Iran, forgetting that the biggest recipients of US foreign aid after Israel are those army generals who receive $1.3 billion out of the states every year.
It was an important moment because it was also the first time in a couple of months that we come to direct confrontation again with the Ministry of Interior. And I think it was the meant signal. I think they were telling us that they were back.
They were showering us with tear gas, bird shots, rubber bullets, live ammunition.
I think we have about 70 people who lost at least one eye.
And hell broke loose. Thousands and thousands and thousands kept on flocking to Tahrir and confronting the police. Dozens died, hundreds were injured.
Before these events, the casualties were more among the poor. What was different during Mohammed Mahmoud is that everyone is at the front. Girls, boys, middle class, poor, everyone was at the front. And I think this sort of gives you an idea about the journey we went through in Tahrir Square.
If we had ever dared to chant against the army, like in February or March, we could have been even lynched by the public. So it proved to be like a huge leap forward in terms of the consciousness of the people, that people are getting increasingly disillusioned by the army.
A couple of days later, we had the elections, which was the 28th of November.
You expect us to consider those elections legitimate, while the police and the army that's protecting the ballot boxes were the same people massacring us, the day before.
I tried to run in the elections. I truly believe that you don't do a revolution and then just leave it. So it is your duty to go down and participate.
This is something that millions of Egyptians have been waiting for and they want to be part of. And I thought there was something very wrong about me calling for boycotting it.
I had been clear for months that I was going to boycott the elections. I believe that they had a very clear idea of the results before they went into the elections, the military council, to make sure that they have a parliament that is supportive of the military.
We used to be a corrupt and dysfunctional country. We're going to become a corrupt, functional country. Everything will look good. Everything will be rotten in the core.
Throughout elections and after the sit-in at the cabinet continued,
they planted informants among protesters and the people in the sit-in, and they kidnapped one of the protesters. His name is Aboudi. They kidnapped him and they beat him up and tortured him.
When the people saw his face, they fumed with anger. And this escalated and escalated.
And they used excessive amount of live ammunition. And this was completely crazy. You had 4 continuous days of killing in the middle of Cairo. And you step out of this and everyone's going on with their normal lives. It was crazy.
They definitely exposed themselves as an army of clowns, as an army that's directed at the end of the day towards the service of the political regime, but not the national security of the citizens.
We saw women being dragged, stripped, and beaten up brutally in the middle of the street.
Everything that we have been trying to expose of the army in one picture.
I never had any glorified image of the army, but to a certain extent, I never put them in the same category as the police.
They always address the revolution as if they are the saviors and they are the protectors, and we should thank them for not treating us like Libya and Syria. Well, they just did.
Egyptians always fled confrontations from the army. Egyptian cabinet, 4 days fighting the army. The worm is turning, and it's a very dangerous place for the army to be.
The major achievement of this revolution is that people are fearless. They shoot us and they kill people and they wound us severely. I have a good friend of mine who lost his eye, and I have another friend who lost both his eyes. And they still participate and they still go in the street.
The body of the regime that we have called for to step down on January 25th is SCAF. This didn't make sense in January. It didn't even make sense in March for a lot of people. It still didn't make sense to a lot of people in May. But now it's unquestionable. They are clearly the enemies of the revolution.
I don't believe that assassinating those generals will solve the problem. I don't believe that, elections, while the generals are still in power, will solve the problem. The revolution will be victorious if we manage to pull together a general strike.
We don't have the weapons, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the prison cells. However, we have the numbers.
We started this uprising with only 3 independent trade unions. Now we have more than 147. And once we build a political arm also for those workers, they need a political party, I think you will be talking about an unstoppable giant. And for me, that's the silver bullet for any dictatorship.